They expected her to defend herself. They expected the woman from Washington, the one who stepped off the train with a trunk full of undelivered letters, to lower her eyes, to offer soft explanations, to somehow make the late arrival of their son's last words feel less like a fresh wound. Instead, Alice Bryant looked at the black mourning ribbon pinned to Mrs. Pike's coat and said only two quiet words. Yes, it is. What happens to a woman when an entire town's grief turns toward her as if she herself had failed to bring their boys home? And how long can someone keep standing under that kind of silence before it begins to change the shape of her own heart? The trunk arrived in Harper's Mill before she did. It came off the morning freight with a War Department tag still tied to the handle, one corner dented, the black paint scratched down to bare metal. The porter set it on the platform and stepped back as if it might contain something contagious. By the time Alice Bryant stepped down from the train, half the town had already seen the words stenciled on the side. Undelivered correspondence European theater returned for civilian claim. Alice was 28 years old, traveling in a navy dress gone shiny at the elbows, with a hat pinned straight and gloves that had been darned twice at the thumb. She carried a satchel in one hand and a folder in the other. Her face had the pale, composed look of someone who had learned that if she gave grief any room in public, strangers would think they had a right to enter it. Mrs. Evelyn Pike was the first to speak. She stood near the depot steps with two women beside her and a black mourning ribbon still pinned to her coat, though her son had been dead nearly 2 years. "You're the girl from Washington," she said. Alice turned. "I worked in Army postal records, yes." Mrs. Pike looked at the trunk. "My boy wrote every week until he died. Then nothing. And now you bring boxes of letters as if that makes anything whole." The platform went still. Alice had heard that voice before. Not Mrs. Pike's, exactly. But that tone. The tone of a mother asking the only person within reach to answer for a war no one person had made. "I'm here to find the families," Alice said. "If any letters belong in Harper's Mill, I'll see they reach the right hands." Bit late for that. No one corrected her. Alice kept her eyes level. "Yes," she said. "It is." That was worse than defending herself. It gave the anger nowhere clean to land. The town watched. Men outside the feed store. A boy on a bicycle. Two women pretending to read the notice board. Everyone quiet in the careful way people are quiet when they intend to talk later. Then a man came out of the old station office. Captain Daniel Mercer had returned from Europe 8 months earlier and had said less in those 8 months than most men said in a single Sunday dinner. He was 36, broad in the shoulders, with brown hair touched gray at the temples and a scar that disappeared under his left collar. He had been at Normandy, then St. Lo, then the Ardennes. People knew this because other men said it for him. He wore no uniform now, only a white shirt with the sleeves rolled, suspenders, and a watch on a worn leather strap. He looked at Alice, then at the trunk, then at Mrs. Pike. "Mrs. Pike," he said quietly, "your wagon is blocking the freight ramp." It was not an accusation. It was worse. It was a fact delivered by a man whose facts tended to become arrangements. Mrs. Pike's mouth tightened, but she moved. Daniel crossed the platform and stopped beside the trunk. "Alice Bryant." "Yes." "Daniel Mercer." "I know." His gaze moved to the folder in her hand. "Washington said you had records experience. They said you were reopening the depot." "Not reopening." He looked toward the station office, where one window was cracked and a board leaned across the doorway. "Repurposing." "For what?" "A place for returning men to file claims, read notices, write home if they still need to, and sit somewhere that isn't a bar." Alice glanced at the depot. Dust in the glass. Weeds near the tracks. An American flag folded inside the office window, waiting for a pole that had not yet been repaired. That sounds like more than one man can manage. It is. He put one hand on the trunk handle. "I've got a room upstairs. Not fine. Dry. Lock on the door. The town has need of someone who understands Army papers. I can pay $20 a month until the county board approves the grant." She looked at him for a moment. "You're offering me work?" "Yes." "After hearing all that?" His face did not change. "I heard a woman get blamed for carrying letters she did not write, and a war she did not start." Alice's throat tightened. Daniel lifted the trunk with both hands. "It's work if you want it." She looked once at the platform, at the faces already pretending not to look back. Then she looked at the old depot. "I want it." The upstairs room smelled of dust, dry pine, and old coal smoke. It had a narrow bed, a washstand, a small stove, and a window that looked over the tracks. Below, the station office had been turned halfway into something new. 2 desks, a filing cabinet, a bulletin board, a cracked map of Europe still pinned to one wall. Daniel had started with intention and run out of hands. Alice began the next morning. She sorted discharge forms, pension notices, job advertisements, hospital referrals, and letters from men who had come home with bodies intact and sleep ruined beyond easy repair. She labeled drawers in a careful hand. She wrote to the Veterans Administration twice before noon and corrected 3 forms Daniel had filled in with the determined incompetence of a man who believed paperwork should surrender out of respect. By afternoon, the first veteran came in. His name was Lloyd Atwater. He had one good eye, a shaking left hand, and a question about vocational training benefits he was embarrassed to ask. Alice did not make him ask twice. She read the form, turned it around, and pointed. "Sign here, not there. That line is for the clerk who likes making life difficult." Lloyd blinked. Daniel, from the other desk, lowered his eyes. It might have been a smile. Might not. The children came on the 3rd day. They were not Daniel's, exactly. They belonged to his younger brother, Paul, who had died on Luzon, and Paul's wife, who had followed him 6 months later from pneumonia and exhaustion. Daniel had taken them in because someone had to, and because the Mercers had never been people who let children become someone else's problem. Thomas was 11. Thin, watchful, already old enough to resent needing anything. June was 6, with dark braids, a solemn mouth, and a habit of carrying one small wooden horse everywhere she went. They came through the depot door after school and stopped when they saw Alice. Thomas looked at the trunk near the back wall. "Is that full of dead men's letters?" Daniel's head came up. Alice answered before he could. "Some of them." June moved closer to Daniel's leg. Thomas stared at Alice as if trying to decide whether honesty made her cruel or safe. "My father wrote letters," he said. "I expect he did. We didn't get all of them." Alice looked at the trunk. "No," she said. "Some didn't make it where they were meant to go." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Then what good are they now?" The room went quiet. Daniel stood very still. Alice folded the form in front of her and set it aside. "When a man writes home," she said, "he is still trying to arrive, even if the letter is late." Thomas looked away first. June whispered, "Can letters be lost on purpose?" Alice looked at the child. "Not if I can help it." That was how June began coming to sit near her desk. Not too close at first, just close enough to watch the labels appear on folders. Daniel noticed. He noticed everything and commented on almost nothing. He noticed that Alice took tea without sugar and forgot to drink it while working. The next morning, a cup appeared on the corner of her desk, placed just far enough from the papers not to endanger them. She noticed that the upstairs window no longer rattled when freight passed after midnight. He did not mention fixing it. She did not mention noticing. That was the first language they shared. Useful silence. The trunk remained locked for 2 weeks. Alice had the key on a chain under her collar. Washington had sent the trunk with instructions, lists, seals, and warnings about emotional complications. Emotional complications were what officials called mothers, wives, brothers, and children before they stood in front of them. The first Harper's Mill letter belonged to Mr. Abel Cross, who had served in Italy and written to his sister before dying of infection in a field hospital near Naples. Alice delivered it herself. Daniel went with her, but stayed at the gate. Miss Cross read the letter in her kitchen with both hands shaking and then sat down hard in a chair. "He said he could smell lemon trees," she whispered. Alice nodded. "He wanted you to know." Miss Cross pressed the paper to her mouth. After that, word traveled. Not kindly at first. Word rarely does. Some said Alice was opening wounds. Some said she was doing God's work. Some said both and sounded surprised to find no contradiction. By November, people began coming to the depot. A father from north of town. A girl who had been engaged to a corporal no one could quite prove had loved her as much as she loved him. A veteran who wanted help writing to the mother of the man who had pulled him out of a burning half-track. Alice kept the records. Daniel kept the room warm. Every morning, he raised the flag outside the depot before unlocking the doors. Not ceremonially. Not for anyone watching. The pole had been repaired with his own hands, sanded smooth, and painted white. He raised the flag as if answering a roll call only he could hear. Alice watched once from the upstairs window. He unfolded it carefully, checked the edges. pulled the rope with slow, even motions. There were men who spoke of patriotism loudly over counters and coffee cups. Daniel Mercer never did. He raised the flag in the cold and made sure men with bad lungs got chairs near the stove. That told Alice more. The trouble came with Mr. Franklin Voss. Voss owned the bank, the lumber yard, and enough opinion to be mistaken for public judgment. He wanted the depot sold to a trucking company. The county grant, if approved, would keep it in community use. Alice's work was making that grant more likely, which made her inconvenient. He came on a rainy Wednesday in a gray suit and a hat too fine for the weather. Daniel was out helping Lloyd Atwater repair a roof before the storm worsened. Alice was alone at the desk, with June coloring quietly near the stove. Voss removed his gloves finger by finger. "Miss Bryant, I've reviewed the county petition." "Have you? I find it sentimental." Alice dipped her pen. "Most paperwork looks that way to men who don't need it." His eyes sharpened. "You are lodging upstairs in a building supervised by an unmarried man." June stopped coloring. Alice kept her face still. "The room has a lock. Mrs. Hamley from the church inspected it herself. Respectability is not a matter of locks. No, it is a matter of conduct." He leaned one hand on the desk. "And what of your conduct in Washington? I'm told you were dismissed." Alice's hand tightened around the pen. "I resigned. After a complaint." She said nothing. His smile was small. "There are people in this town still grieving. They do not need a woman with questionable nerves handling private letters from their dead." June stood, wooden horse in hand. "My Uncle Daniel says Miss Bryant has the steadiest hands in town." Voss looked at the child as if she were furniture that had spoken out of turn. Alice rose. "That is enough, Mr. Voss." He straightened. "I'll be asking the board to suspend this little memorial office until your background is properly reviewed." Daniel's voice came from the doorway. "Ask them in public." Voss turned. Daniel stood just inside, rein on his shoulders, hat in one hand. "I beg your pardon." "Public meeting. Friday. Church Hall. Bring whatever you think you know." Voss's expression cooled. "Captain Mercer, you may have been decorated overseas, but decoration does not make a man wise in civic matters." Daniel hung his wet hat on the peg. "No. It teaches him to read the difference between incoming fire and smoke." The room held still. Voss left without another word. That night, Alice packed. She did it neatly. Folded the navy dress. Wrapped the letters that were not official. Placed the key to the trunk on the washstand because she had no right to carry Harper's Mill into scandal. Daniel knocked once on the doorframe. She turned. He did not enter. "I'm not asking you to leave," he said. "I know. Then why is the trunk closed?" "Because he's not wrong about the complaint." Daniel waited. Alice looked down at her gloves. "In Washington, I handled letters from men listed as missing. One mother came every week. Her son's file changed from missing to dead, but the notice was delayed. I saw the update before she did. I told her gently not to hope too hard." Her voice thinned, but did not break. The next day, the army corrected the file. He had been found alive in a German hospital. She called me cruel. She was right. Daniel said nothing for a long moment. Then he asked, "Did you know the correction was coming?" "No." "Did you lot?" "No." "Did you keep her from writing him?" Alice looked up. "No." "Then you were not cruel. You were the person standing nearest when a terrible machine turned the wrong gear." She closed her eyes. "I am so tired of carrying other people's last words." What does it do to a woman when the last words of strangers begin to live inside her own silence? How long can someone keep delivering other people's final hopes before those hopes start reshaping the quiet corners of her own heart? If that weight already feels familiar, tell me in the comments where in the US you're watching from. I want to know where these stories of quiet American duty are reaching. A like and subscribe really helps more people find the ones who carried the letters without ever asking to be remembered. Daniel stepped closer, still outside the room. "I know." She opened her eyes. And there, for the first time, she saw what she had mistaken for composure. Not emptiness. Not coldness. A man holding his own last words because no one had handed them to him. "Who did you not hear from?" she asked. His face went very still. "My brother." The answer was plain. Too plain. Alice felt the room change. "Paul." Daniel nodded once. "They said he wrote before the last patrol." Nothing came. The trunk seemed suddenly larger between them, downstairs in the dark office. Alice whispered, "Why didn't you ask me to search it?" His eyes met hers. "Because you were not brought here to serve my grief." The words struck her more deeply than kindness would have. A lesser man would have asked the first day, would have demanded, would have put his private ache ahead of every widow in the county. Daniel Mercer had carried furniture, raised flags, fixed windows, defended her name, and never once used his authority to make her open a wound for him. Alice sat slowly on the bed. For the first time since arriving in Harper's Mill, she cried. Not loudly, not completely, just enough for the room to know. Daniel stayed in the doorway until she found her breath again. Then he said, Friday is coming whether you pack or not. She wiped her face. That is not comforting. No. He looked almost apologetic. I'm not known for comforting. Despite herself, she laughed. It surprised them both. The meeting filled the church hall. Voss spoke first. He used phrases like public trust, improper influence, emotional instability, and unsuitable management. Mrs. Pike sat in the second row, black ribbon pinned at her collar. Alice sat near the front with her hands folded and the trunk key cold against her skin. When Voss finished, the room was quiet in the satisfied way rooms get after someone has made suspicion sound reasonable. Then Daniel stood. He did not bring notes. This country asked ordinary boys to cross oceans, he said. It asked farmers, clerks, mechanics, sons, husbands, and brothers to go farther than most of them had ever imagined. No one moved. It asked their families to wait, to read every envelope twice, to keep supper warm for men who might not come home, to take telegrams at the door and still raise children the next morning. Mrs. Pike lowered her eyes. Daniel looked toward Alice. Miss Bryant carried the words that were left behind, not because she enjoyed grief, because somebody had to keep the name straight. Somebody had to make sure a letter written in mud outside Naples or under shellfire in Belgium did not vanish because the man who wrote it was no longer alive to ask where it went. He turned back to the room. You may vote against the depot. You may sell the building. You may decide this town prefers quiet paperwork and tidy forgetting. But you will not call her unstable for doing what half of us did not have the strength to do. Voss rose. Captain. Daniel's voice did not rise. I'm not finished. Voss sat. That was the sort of thing Daniel Mercer could do without appearing to try. Daniel reached into his coat and removed a folded letter. Lloyd Atwater received this from a mother in Ohio yesterday. Her son died in his arms. Lloyd had not slept a full night since coming home because he never wrote her. Miss Bryant sat with him until the letter was done. He set it on the table. Abel Cross's sister got her brother's last description of lemon trees because Miss Bryant found a misfiled envelope. Another letter. 3 widows have had pension claims corrected in this office. 4 veterans have work training applications filed. 2 boys who thought their fathers forgot them now know the mail failed, not the men. His hand rested on the final paper. This is not sentiment. This is duty. The room stayed silent. Then Mrs. Pike stood. She looked at Alice. My boy, she said, voice rough, was Private Edward Pike. Infantry. France. Alice nodded carefully. I know the name. Mrs. Pike's hand trembled against the pew. If there is a letter, I would like it. Alice stood. I will look. Mrs. Pike nodded. That was the vote before the vote. The depot stayed. Franklin Voss lost by 12 hands and left before the coffee was poured. Winter settled in. The office grew warmer. Not only from the stove. People brought chairs, curtains, a better lamp. Mrs. Pike came every Thursday and sat by the window, knitting socks for veterans at the hospital in Des Moines. She did not apologize with words. She brought Alice a jar of blackberry jam and said it was too tart. Alice understood. June began sleeping through the night after Alice helped her write a letter to her father and place it in a box marked for things love still knows. Thomas started coming after school to help alphabetize files and pretended it was not because he liked being useful. Daniel fixed the broken clock over the door. Alice taught him how to type. He was terrible. You're striking the keys like they offended you, she said. They're resisting order. They are letters, Captain. Letters cause trouble. She looked at him over the machine. They also bring men home. He did not answer. But the next day, he tried again. The discovery came in February, in a batch of correspondence forwarded from a storage office in St. Louis. Alice was sorting by regiment when she saw the name. Mercer, Paul E. Delivered to wrong unit. Returned. Forwarding uncertain. Her hands went cold. The envelope was stained, creased, and sealed. She sat with it for nearly an hour before taking it to Daniel. He was outside, lowering the flag in a snow that had begun without permission. She waited until the folds were finished. Then she held out the letter. For a moment, he did not take it. When he did, his fingers closed carefully, as if paper could bruise. Inside, Paul's handwriting was uneven but clear. Danny, if this reaches you, Ma will say I should have written sooner, and she'll be right. Tell her I tried. We move out tomorrow. Don't make a face. I can see it from here. I am not afraid the way I thought I would be. Some of that is because I had you for a brother, and some is because I finally understand why you always fix things before anybody asked. A man ought to leave the place behind him better guarded than he found it. If I do not come back, take the children. Not because they need a roof. Because they need someone who knows love is mostly showing up tired and doing what must be done anyway. And Danny, do not turn into stone. You were never as hard as you pretended. Paul. Daniel read it once. Then again. The snow gathered on his shoulders. Alice stood beside him and said nothing. At last, he folded the letter and pressed it to his mouth. Not long. Just enough. When he lowered it, his eyes were wet and his face was still his face. But changed. Thank you, he said. Alice shook her head. It was late. Yes. He looked at the depot. The lit windows. The flag folded under his arm. June's wooden horse visible on the desk inside. Mrs. Pike's knitting basket by the stove. But it arrived. Spring came early that year. The county put a proper sign above the depot door. Harper's Mill Veterans and Family Office. Daniel said it was too long. Alice said government signs usually were. On the first clear morning in April, he asked her to walk with him past the tracks, where the grass had begun greening along the old freight yard. He carried his hat in both hands. That made her nervous. Alice, he said. She stopped walking. He looked toward the depot before looking back at her. I asked you to stay once because I needed a clerk. Yes. That was true. I know. It is no longer the whole truth. The wind moved between them, smelling of cold dust, spring mud, and something beginning again. He took Paul's letter from his coat pocket, folded small from being carried. My brother told me not to turn into stone, he said. I have been trying to obey him. Alice's throat tightened. Daniel looked at her with the grave steadiness that had first met her on the platform. I won't ask you to carry my grief. You've carried enough. I'm asking if you would consider sharing my home. My name. My mornings under that flag. My family, which is untidy and loud, and still healing badly in places. Alice's eyes filled. He went on, because stopping now would have been cowardice, and Daniel Mercer had run out of patience for that in himself. I love you. Quietly, I expect. Imperfectly. But with every honest thing I have. Alice looked back at the depot. At the platform where she had arrived blamed for the dead. At the office where letters had found their way home. At the flagpole Daniel had repaired before anyone praised him for it. At the country that had asked much of its people and still, somehow, produced men who raised flags in the cold and women who kept names from disappearing. Then she looked at him. I am very tired of rooms that are only rooms, she said. His face changed. Just slightly. Enough. I would like a home. Daniel let out a breath that seemed to have been waiting since Normandy. He took her hand carefully, not as if claiming it, as if being trusted with it. That summer, the depot became the busiest quiet place in Harper's Mill. Veterans came for forms and stayed for coffee. Mothers came with photographs. Children came to see the maps. June kept her wooden horse on Alice's desk until one day she forgot it there and did not panic. Thomas learned to type better than Daniel and never let him forget it. Mrs. Pike received her son's letter in June. It was only one page. He had written about rain, canned peaches, and how he had seen an American flag sewn onto a French girl's sleeve because her family had hidden it for 4 years and wanted the soldiers to know they had been expected. Mrs. Pike read it at Alice's desk. Then she folded it, pressed it to her heart, and looked toward the flag outside. He was proud, she said. Alice nodded. Yes. Daniel stood by the stove, one hand on the mantel, silent in the way he was when silence was respect rather than distance. Years later, people would say Alice Bryant came to Harper's Mill with a trunk full of sorrow and turned it into a place of comfort. She never liked that telling. The sorrow was already there. In kitchens, in glove boxes, in cedar chests, in men who woke before dawn, in women who still set aside the better piece of pie out of habit. She had only opened the right drawers and put names where names belonged. People would say Captain Daniel Mercer saved her reputation. He would shake his head at that. A reputation is what people say when they're too far away to know the truth, he would answer. I only stood close enough to see it. Every morning, he raised the flag outside the depot. Every morning, Alice unlocked the office. And inside, on the desk nearest the window, sat the old metal trunk, dented and black and no longer treated like something contagious. It had become what all hard things become when honorable people refuse to throw them away. A witness, a burden, a beginning. And sometimes, when the first train passed and the windows trembled, Alice would look up to see Daniel standing by the door with coffee in each hand, watching her as if the best letter of his life had finally arrived and chosen to stay.